Welcome to my review of Shiro for the Switch. I believe it may be on a few other platforms. The game didn't take me too long to beat. It may have been in the 2-hour range. I would have to check again, but not too long. So basically the game is kind of like a budget Super Meat Boy, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a much worse version of Super Meat Boy in a lot of ways, but not quite. It's structured a little bit differently, but some of the controls are very reminiscent of that. It tries to control a lot like the Meat Boy games. Now you see it started out with a shooter style stage, but the innovation kind of ends there. You know, you have very little in the way of different types of stages. It's a very short game, and the control has this delayed feel to it and kind of a slippery feel to it that makes the control kind of shitty and really brings the game down. That was one aspect that brought the game down even further for me. Like when you jump into these kanji marks and you try to adjust your trajectory to fly in a certain direction, it's very fucking finicky. And it just really has a shitty feel to it. I mean, it's a mechanic that I've probably done hundreds of times in other games, you know, where you jump into something and then you can aim your direction. I mean, it's a very common thing done in a lot of, modern indie games. And it feels like shit in this game. I mean, I can't even count the amount of times that shit like that happened where I missed my launches. It just has a shitty control to it that's hard to explain. And, you know, of course, while I'm watching this video again, I don't even remember exactly what exactly it was, why I controlled so bad, because I haven't played this in some weeks, so it's not fresh in my mind. But I remember that it really handled like shit. And the problem with that is that's one of the main mechanics of the game that you're going to be doing, is jumping inside those symbols and launching. And you're going to be doing a lot of platforming where that's an integral part of the platforming. Like it's not optional, you know, and it's overused like a motherfucker. So, you know, you're going to feel the burn of it when it's inconsistent and it controls shitty. And the rest of the control, you know, a lot of times I just die on stupid shit because the control just has kind of a delay to it or a slipperiness to it. I remember it just didn't feel responsive. And I don't remember exactly what it was about it without analyzing it again, but I can tell you that was one of my main issues with the game. But the game has bigger issues than that. See, the structure of the game, it's really just kind of simple, and it just feels like a very basic version of Meat Boy, you know, with no real thought put into it. You know, I mean, it's not designed in a clever way to where it's challenging in an enjoyable way. And I don't know that I would say that it feels completely thrown together because that's a little bit extreme, but you know, it definitely has, like, there was some thought put into it. It's not a complete mess or anything, but when you look at when you're talking about mediocre level design like this with bad controls, for me it makes for a bad experience overall. Plus the game is short, which in this case, the short length is a positive because the game is really not that good. So, but I still wouldn't consider that anything to give it bonus points for being short, you know what I mean? Because anyone can make a shitty fucking game and just make it 2 minutes long. So I wouldn't really say that's anything special. But yeah, you can see now it's just irritating because it's starting to really use the mechanic. The problem is, as I can see here, is when you launch a lot of times, it's very hard to consistently get enough momentum because when you launch, sometimes you do a very short jump. And of course, when you launch, most of the time you want it to be a far jump to get to the next thing. But the problem is a lot of times it's a very short jump and it doesn't make it across. And then on top of that, they disappear sometimes, just adding to the frustration of it. I believe you also have a limited time to stay inside of them before it shoots you out automatically, which are all things that you can adapt to in a good game. And obviously I adapted to it because I beat the game. You know, I only review games that I completed, but I've beaten a lot of fucking games that I didn't enjoy. And this was definitely one of them where I was just waiting for it to be over just to get the kill on my kill list. But I can't say I enjoyed the game. I mean, you know, it's one thing to die because of a lapse in judgment or something like that. But when the game just feels shitty, I don't really want to have to adapt to shitty controls and mechanics, you know, to be able to finish the game. You see, I did a short jump there when I wanted to launch with the full momentum. But sometimes you get a short one and sometimes you get a long one. I couldn't figure out what determines what gives me a short or long jump. I still haven't figured that out. So that's going to be part of the fun when you're doing these parts is, hoping that you get the proper jump length and you don't fall on the spikes. But you see how the checkpoint system works. You do respawn close to where you died. And you have unlimited lives, and the game does save. So you can shut the system off and go back to it. But yeah, just a very mediocre game, all around. The level layouts are mediocre. The control is below mediocre. The control's quite bad. For a game that demands so much precision, the control issues are really glaring because it expects you to do a lot of precise movements and shit like that. So, obviously when it's this hard to even do simple launch like I'm trying to do here, that's a problem. You shouldn't have to practice the shit out of the game just to do a very simple movement consistently. For me, that's a definite weakness in the design. Because there's many other games that do this much better with this kind of control, and you don't have to, struggle to fucking learn it because the game plays badly. So, I do consider that a big weakness of the game. But even if the game had perfect control, it's just a mediocre level layout. It's nothing. It's nothing engaging. You know what I mean? It's like these simple little platforms that would be very simple if you had good control. It would be very fucking easy. It's really not anything clever or special. Most of the time you're collecting keys and bringing them to a door to get to the next area. There's a shitty boss fight as you see here. It's pretty shitty. You just have to memorize where the orbs are going to go, basically. And then it's very easy once you understand how it works. It's pretty damn easy, but it does feel kind of sloppy. Because of the delayed controls and shit, it is easy to get hit. I think there's kind of a slipperiness. Like, it's one of those things where your character takes a moment to gain momentum, I think. I think that's what it is. Like, your character, when you want to walk and jump, it takes a moment for your character to get the momentum. And it's just kind of slow to move your character and sluggish. The art style is also just very simple, pixelated. It's trying to look like an old school game, it looks like, but old games didn't look this fucking bad most of the time. You know what I mean? They didn't look like they were purposely trying to be pixelated. I don't really like that art style where it tries to look, intentionally pixelated, and it doesn't even look anything like the games did of that time. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's supposed to be like, it's almost like a parody of how games looked. It looks kind of shitty, uninspired, and generic. I really don't like that art style. But I mean, like I said, if the game is great, I don't really give a shit about that, But this game doesn't really have a lot of redeeming qualities for me. And this boss fight was pretty tedious. Eventually you'll get it, but it's just a pain in the ass. You have to memorize some of the shit, but it just doesn't feel good to play. I think that might be the only real boss fight in the game, aside from at the end. I think you may fight a boss at the very end, but it's mostly just a traversal sequence where you're trying to move quickly through the environments. So you can see now they're starting to use this mechanic heavily with these arrows. And it can be very irritating just because it controls so badly. So you'll be repeating these sequences a lot, most likely. And what you're seeing is a good chunk of what you're going to be doing in the game, so it's pretty representative. What I showed here were some of the more irritating segments. And, most of the game is like this. It just gets progressively worse as you get farther because, you have the bad control, so the game just gets worse because it has more situations like this where you have to maintain these platformings for a while, Which would be fine if the game actually played well. But I mean, even if the game did play well, you can see this is not a great game design or anything too compelling. I mean, if you play a game like Meat Boy, you can just feel that the game does it way better than this. You have some other mechanics that, are introduced later, like these bouncing off of these mushrooms. That's another shitty mechanic in the game. It's kind of similar to if you ever played Super Mario Brothers, where the springs were introduced in the lost levels. I think that was where I mainly remember the springs being introduced. And sometimes you would get a long jump, and sometimes it'd be a real short jump. And it's kind of hard to predict which one you're going to get. it's that similar issue with the mushrooms, where sometimes you get a long jump, sometimes it's a real short one, and you die. Same thing with launching out of the arrows. You know, sometimes it's a short launch, sometimes it's a long launch. The problem with that is when you mix the mushrooms with the launch arrows, it's kind of like it just feels like a dice roll if you're going to get the right length on your jumps. It just makes it even shittier. So this is the final boss, which is not much of a fight. It's mainly just moving fast. That's really all there is to it. It's pretty damn basic. You know, the only reason it might be a little challenging is because of the bad control. So for me, this game is a 5 out of 10. It's mediocre. I mean, at most, I could give it maybe a 5.5 at most. But for me, it's a 5 out of 10. I thought it was very mediocre. I wasn't engaged with it. I thought it was a pretty boring game as well and kind of frustrating. If you have any questions, let me know. And thanks for watching.